So we have a fascinating panel here of people who have served in, I think it's fair to say, somewhat less than optimal economic and social times, have made certain choices or are now facing big challenges. So I want to start with the new president of Argentina. Those of us who follow developments down there know that, to put it mildly, it was a fairly tumultuous political and economic circumstance which produced a remarkable victory for a very gifted leader. And I would like for you to, essentially, you represent a given response to a totally discredited economic and political situation when you took office. You think that's fair to say? And yet, people can discredit it, but then when you try to do something about it, the same people who put you in may say, oh yes, but I don't want to give up anything. So I would like you to describe for our people what you found, what you're trying to do, and how others can support this, particularly people from the private sector and the NGO sector.
Thank you, President, for inviting me again. We, with Matteo, we came here being mayors, so be careful, Mayor, things can get much more complicated. Eh? But, well, Argentina, as you know, President, has suffered decades of populism, and things worsened in the last 5 to 10 years. We were in direction to another huge crisis as we suffered in 2001. But fortunately, Argentines altogether decided to go for a change. We really believe that we deserve to live better. We wanted to be part of the world. We wanted to cut with isolism. And we ran through a very complex election, but we succeed. And that's what you feel when you travel now to Argentina. A great optimism, a lot of enthusiasm, a full and deep understanding of what we have to go through to go back to be a developed and competitive country. At the beginning, as government, we had to take tough decisions. We have to unify the exchange rate. We have to remove barriers to trade. We have to release the payment of dividends abroad. We have to settle an agreement with the bondholders. But we take all those decisions always thinking, especially in the most vulnerable part of our society. So we were very near our citizens that need the help through this process. And with three main commitments, in which I will try to focus the first one, maybe the most important, to take Argentina to zero poverty. Now Argentina has 30% of citizens under the line of poverty. But we all know that to cut poverty, you have to create good jobs, quality jobs. And for that, you need to create an environment of trust, of confidence. You have to assure the investors that you will be attached to the rule of law, that you will be predictable, you will be reliable. Because everybody knows that Argentina has great human resources and lots of natural resources. So our challenge is to be organized, to be reliable. And we have been working on that. From the very beginning, we gave back the needed independence to the central bank, to cut inflation, one of the worst things that always affects before the poor people. We also gave independence to the National Bureau of Statistics to produce numbers in a transparent and a reliable way. By the way, last week, after 10 years, IMF visited Argentina because we want to fulfill the Article 4 as any normal country in the world. So now we really believe that we are creating the conditions. And I'm happy to tell you that we have been quite successful. 2 events. Last week we organized our first Business and Investment Forum. More than 3,000 businessmen from 68 countries attended, looking for opportunities to invest in Argentina. The same week we received the first offer for renewables. We were demanding the first 1,000 megawatts out of a program of 20,000, and we received 7 times more what we were demanding. So companies of all around the world ready to invest in 20 years long-term contracts to supply energy. That shows that we are going the right way. But let me finish in this first intervention. Argentina is really a country with a great future, thanks to the capability to produce food. We are producing food for 400 million people, so we can be a big player in terms of food security in the future years. We are forecasting to double that production in the next 5 years. We can be also creating 40 times more mining products in a sustainable way, obviously. We can be a big player in renewables, but also in non-conventional energy. We have a huge shale gas and shale oil reserve, and we can be very good, and we are very good, providing added value services. So in all that, we really believe that there is room for new partners. We need all global companies coming to Argentina, American and from all abroad, so as to help us in developing our country, reducing poverty and achieving what we are looking for our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, now, you all follow me. There's a method in my madness here. I'm going to get rid of the Italian bloc first. That's what Prime Minister Renzi said, that he and President Macri are basically both Italians. He's just masquerading as an Argentine. But look, be serious with me now, because this is an important. These 4 people give us a piece, at least a piece of understanding about the way the world is working or not, as the case may be. So here's Argentina, was the 8th richest country in the world in the first decade of the 20th century. And then all that happened has happened. Now, he just said, I think if we do the right things and get the right help, we can turn this around quickly. I agree with that. He's got a relatively stable political situation. You get a term of years. He's gotten a very commanding support in the public and among the people. Now, let's move now to Italy, where you won election with a great deal of enthusiasm for your progressive agenda. You've been a leader in clean energy production, and I think you're doing great, and you're going to have this referendum sometime before the end of the year, apparently, on changes in government. The problem I think that Italy has had is it's hard to have a national economic plan when it's hard to maintain a government in power for very long, however many governments you've had since the end of World War II. And yet you seem to be on the verge of doing it. And most people who are not Europeans, and even many Europeans don't know that for much of the last 50 years, northern Italy has had a per capita income higher than Germany. But like every other country, you have the rich places, the poor places, the places in between. The difficulty of building a national consensus for economics, culture, and politics, and your system gets in your way a lot. So tell us how you're navigating what amounts to institutionalized dissent to an extent most of us don't have to deal with.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much for the invitation and this question. I think that, for me, Italy really could give a great energy and dynamism for Europe, because the question now is Europe for us, if really accept the challenge of change. Italy is a great country, everyone loves Italy, I think, I hope, despite my daily entrance in the stage. But the real question for Italy is not simply to remember the great past, the great masterpieces, the great places of the culture. The real challenge for us is accept the challenge of change. Institutional reforms are exactly that. Give new energy to Italy, because Italy could help and support Europe in a radical transformation. Very briefly, I think Europe is one of the most incredible victories of the history, because 70 years of peace, 70 years of prosperity, and you, President, knows very well this very important challenge. And despite the sad, for me, decision of our friends of UK to exit from EU, I think we have an incredible opportunity to continue with the USA and other friends to build a vision for the future as Europeans. But Europe has to accept the idea to transform institutional strategies, economic direction, because the austerity is not sufficient, is not enough to change the life of the people, to accept the challenge of fight against terrorism, not only with the correct approach of arms and of police, but also with the cultural challenge. To achieve this result, I think Italy had to change first. For this reason, we achieved the result of transformation of labor market. Last year we discussed about it, and finally Italy arrived to the same level of labor market of Germany or UK, and Germany, UK, obviously USA, arrived to this point 20 years ago. We arrived with 20 years on delay, unfortunately, in the labor market. We reduced the level of red tape, of bureaucracy. We changed the finally just judicial system. We are the #1 in Europe for the moment in the digitalization of trials, of processes, of courts, because the problem of our judicial system was one of the terrible things for investors. So change and invest in digitalization of justice is a part of transformation of Italy. But at the same time, we transform constitution to reduce the level of political decisions, to reduce the number of politicians. This is a very populist message, but it's a very correct message in this moment, and to give more simplicity to Italian institutions. This is not important only for Italy. This is my conclusion. This is the great chance to give a message to Europe, because if Europe don't change, this is my personal view, Europe is only a museum. I believe in Europe as laboratory, in Europe as place of innovation, and I think this is a priority for new generation.
Thank you. First, I think there's a lot to that. There's we outsiders who are fans of yours and yours and yours and want Europe to do well, we tend to see all this in very simple terms. And the truth is, there were a lot of serious people who had reservations about the European Union or about Italian national politics as constituted. because they thought it was inefficient and ripe for, you know, slowing things down. So your basic position is you've got to change it to preserve it, and I think you may be right about that. I think if you look at the sheer number of governments Italy's had since in the last 50 years, and the astonishing achievements of the country almost in spite of it, you're trying to say, like the model that we operate on here, you know, government, business, labor, NGOs, international groups, we all try to work together. It's very hard to make it work if the national government itself is dysfunctional. So I thank you for what you said. Now, let's go to the Mayor of London. Your very presence here, who you are, what your roots are, what your identity is, widely publicized, has proved what I think is the great joy of the interdependent world. You are an example of positive interdependence. I think it's fair to say that when your country voted to get out of the European Union, at least in that interdependence, they thought the negatives outweighed the positives. I think we all believe it had something to do with something as elemental as turnout, that the intensity of the feelings of people resisting our being pulled together outweighs the intensity of those who are winning from this. So you're in the epicenter of this. It's almost like you're standing in the eye of a hurricane. For you, I imagine a pretty nice one being Mayor of London, but explain this to people. How do you see this? What does the Brexit vote mean in terms of what's going on all over the world? And for you as a mayor, or is London just a thing unto itself and you don't have to worry?
Well, thank you, President. After hearing Prime Minister Renzi speaking and President Macri, two former mayors, can I say I've got the best job in the world and I'm staying put. But I mean, you raised my election as the Mayor of London and the referendum. I think there are two different events that took place in the last 12 months. The message from my election was my opponent had a very divisive campaign. And we showed a positive campaign can succeed. Hope over fear, unity over division, which was fantastic for me. And it sent a message to the world it's possible to be a proud Londoner, a proud Brit, a proud European, somebody who's proud of being of Asian origin, somebody who's proud of being of Pakistani heritage, and somebody who's proud of being a Muslim. And it's and I say to those, and you may know who I'm talking about, there is nothing incompatible with having Western liberal values and being a mainstream Muslim. But I'm afraid during the referendum campaign, people who have challenges getting their children into good local schools, people who worry about healthcare, people who worry about getting genuinely affordable homes, were led down a path of the politics of fear. They were told the reason for your challenges and your issues is because of the EU, is because of the other. And this anti-immigration sentiment was allowed to succeed. And it's no coincidence that, you know, some of those involved in the Brexit campaign are involved in another campaign taking place somewhere else in the world this November. And all I'd say is this, look, London has been open to trade, people and ideas for more than 1,000 years, and that's not going to change. London is open. And I'm proud to say I'm the mayor of a city that has Londoners originally from Italy, originally from France, originally from Germany, from Poland, from Bulgaria, Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jews, those members of an organised faith, those not, rich, poor, old, young, lesbian, gay. We don't just tolerate each other, we respect, embrace and celebrate each other. And you know, I'm obviously disappointed my fellow citizens chose to leave the EU, but that doesn't stop us being European, and we've got to make it work.
But if you look at the pattern of the vote, though, it really is, it's a picture that can be adapted to similar challenges in almost any country in the world. I mean, the Londoners, the young, the diverse populations, the people that feel that they're winning in the global economy, that feel they have a place in European society, the university communities, Northern Ireland and Scotland that already feel largely they're in the European economy as much as the UK economy, they voted to stay. And as more comfortable with it, they had a comfortably respectable 65% turnout. And then England and Wales in the small town and rural areas were uncomfortable with it, and they had a 71 to 75% turnout. And that's the whole explanation. In other words, if they could have voted, I think 2 days later, they would have voted to stay. All these counties voted to give up, English counties voted to give up economic aid from the EU, and they needed it, but they had no idea what they were doing. They just wanted to come inside and close the door. There is a kind of a visceral us and them mentality developing. And where I grew up, it's a very old story. So I feel like I'm listening to 78 RPM wax records on an old record player. But is there a strategy that would be good for England and the UK that somehow allows London, for example, which dwarfs every other city, but you had similar trends in other voting trends in other cities, to connect better with people in these rural areas? Is there a way that the economic magnet that is London can be brought into this? And this is something that, you know, there are different voting patterns in Argentina. There are different voting patterns in Italy. So say something about that. Is it the life experience, the way the EU was received in a small town in England is very different than the way a 30-year-old, you know, Londoner from you name it receives it?
It's the age-old problem of ensuring that everyone benefits from the fruits of prosperity. And I'm really proud that London was the one region of England to vote to remain in the EU, decisively so. In my view, it's not a zero-sum game. London doing well is not at the expense of the rest of the UK. If London does well, the rest of the country prospers. I think one of the things we failed to do, those of us involved in the Remain campaign, was to make the emotional connection with the benefits of the EU, as Prime Minister Renzi talked about, 70 years of peace, what it means to be a modern European, the emotional reasons for why it's important to show solidarity. And it's really easy to blame the other for your grievances. And I've seen in the last 5 days I've been in the USA how that's been played out here, because it's really easy to blame somebody else. It's really easy to explain away your problems by saying there's the land of milk and honey over the rainbow if you vote for me or vote to leave the EU. What's more important is, rather than playing on people's fears, address them. What are your concerns? If it is the case the EU is imperfect, and it is imperfect, we'd agree, let's reform the EU. You know, if it is the case that there's an issue around immigration, let's reform the immigration rules. And the age-old problem, and you will know this, President, from your time during an age of prosperity, is that, you know, there is a perception as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And many people who do the right thing, they do 1 or 2 or 3 jobs, can't get their children into good schools, can't get decent housing. And our job as progressives is to make sure we energize, infuse and inspire those people to recognize, you know, progressive politics is the solution. The idea of building walls or the idea of leaving our continent, I think that way lies problems.
Got a couple of questions that I want to call let Ngozi close out, because she's been in nearly every one of these CGIs. She helped to build the economy of her nation. She has worked in a plethora of internationally responsible organizations and is now trying to help make vaccines available at a time when we're all worried about a recurrence of cholera and the outbreak of Zika. In the context of that, she sees governments that work and governments that don't, and how they can or cannot properly interface with international organizations. So what's your reaction to what you just heard, and what should we be thinking about? How do you know what's going on everywhere. I've known you too long to know you don't. So what's your reaction to all this?
Well, thank you very much. My reaction is that when I listen to all this, it just shows you how we are in very uncertain times, and how we really have to focus on those things that, as the Mayor of London said, will address the fears and the wants and the needs of those who feel left behind. I don't think we can ignore them, because other people are using them as a platform in order to divide and split the world even more. So in listening to all this, the issue to me is, what are those things that bring us all together? What are those things that form the bedrock that can bring prosperity to these people, that can make them feel part of the economy, not neglected, not left behind? So those are some of the reactions I have as I listen, whether it's those who reacted to voting to leave, for UK to leave the EU, or those in the EU who are now agitating because they've seen the Brexit vote and are trying to follow populist movements to get their countries to leave, or even those in Argentina that used to be a very rich country, who are now seeing poverty rates go to 30%, that used to be in the single digits. So we must address those. And you will not be surprised if I say that in all this controversy and uncertainty, there's one certain bullet. It's not a magic bullet, but it's a very important one to address some of the wants, needs, and fears of those at the bottom of the ladder. And I'm the chair of an organization that tries to make this work in 73 countries around the world. You know, one of the best buys in economics today is immunization. One of the things you have to make sure to save your budgets on health and education and to save the economy is immunization. I know you've never thought about it that way. $1 invested in immunizing, in vaccines, returns $16. So if you want to address one of the needs of those at the bottom end of the ladder, those in poverty, you have to make sure that they get access to health care and that their children get immunized so they don't become problems in the future. The rate of return on that is very high. What happens when we don't prepare for this? What happens when our health systems are not strong enough? We have pandemics like Ebola, like Zika, and I'm sure that the countries, the Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone, who suffered so much, will tell you that if they had had stronger health systems, they would have been able to address most of what was going on. Because there were no labs to test the virus to see what it was, it took 3 months before we had an answer. So let me circle back and say, apart from healthcare, education, access to jobs, we really need to look at the bottom line for those who are left behind. And it's only then we'll be able to debunk those who are trying to use them as a platform.
Thank you. Thank you. Here's what I want you to think about with all this stuff going on around the world. And one of the reasons I wanted Ngozi to go last is that if you live and work, as many of us do, in developing countries, their biggest problem, without regard to whether there are religious or other political or ideological conflicts, they just don't have the systems that enable them to thrive, things that other people take for granted. And I'm grateful for what you're doing for Gavi as a result of that. If you live in a much more developed country, you have systems and you have to fight the politics. That in very different ways is Italy and Argentina. You've got to work through that. And when you do, then if you're basically a city-state like London, this represents what I think is happening in less stark ways all over the world, where urban areas make people feel welcome and included and generally are more prosperous. And generally, though, accept the model of CGI, which is that business, labor, NGOs, government, citizens, bloc leaders, they should all work together and we get better results. The conflict model works better at a time of economic distress and social upheaval to win elections, but it never works better to produce positive results. So that you get people at risk of shooting themselves in the foot. And one of the things that I think we really have to work on all around the world is not to let our urban, diverse, young, economically successful areas just basically say, this is too exhausting. I'm going to run away from the rural areas. I'm going to run away from all this. The great thing about the nation state is it's the only real organization in the world that basically makes it possible to at least work for collective security and bring people together across more than racial, religious, and gender divides, across real chasms of experience and how they make a living. And I think it's, this is a big test for all of us too. Can we find a way to, respond to this? But in the meanwhile, the President of Argentina is restoring economic sanity and political hope to people. And the Prime Minister of Italy has done some things I didn't think he could do, both in substantive areas like clean energy and actually asking the politicians to give him a chance to let the people vote or having fewer politicians. Think about that for a minute. I cheered you when you were elected mayor of London. I thought, the West doesn't understand we'll never beat these determined terrorists without our own Muslim neighbors and friends and citizens. We can't do it. We got to have us. We have to do this together. And I thank you for the fact that after all these years, you've never grown weary of making things better. Thank you. You were going to make a point. You want to make a point?
Mr. President, also the name of my friends, only one thing, 30 seconds to give this message. Those issues will be discussed in the next G7 in Italy in May 2017 in Sicily. My wife waits for you as first gentleman in G7 meeting.
Let me, I will wait you 2018, the G20 again. Be your friend.
Let's give them all a big hand. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats and allow our